Chapter 34 Cyberization. A war council was hastily assembled aboard one of the Savanti corvettes. Ino and her command team joined Rylan and his own people at a long rectangular table in the middle of what Ino guessed was the Combat Information Center, or CIC. Oracle Aster sat at the head of the table, advisors flanking him on each side. Ino, as the commander of all coalition forces on the Sanctuary Moon, was given a place near the Oracle. Prispin, Sota, and Elodie were here as well, representing the Tactical Officer Corps, Command Team, and Marine Detachment respectively. Astro Creator Azarin was here as well, looking very sickly, her brown leaves covered in black spots. Nagini and Antipov sat at the far end, representing the 250,000 former slaves of the Tenasilsi. A single empty chair was reserved for Aranoe of the Caravanseers, but she did not appear, and the meeting started without her. Once everyone was seated, Oracle Aster cleared his throat. The Nexus storm is clearing, and now it is clear that this crisis is not over yet. A holographic map of the Weeping Ghost Nebula appeared on the conference table. A blinking red dot appeared in a nearby star system, marking the presence of enemy starships. As the storm clears, we are starting to regain contact with distant outposts. FTL comms are coming back online, and we have our first picture of the strategic situation. It's not the best picture, but any information is good, Prispin said. Savanti long-range sensors based in the colony are finally punching through the radiation. Gravitic sensors have picked up a Destican fleet here. He pointed to the enemy ships highlighted in the Baham system. Rylan narrowed his eyes. Can we identify the ships specifically? Not with 100% certainty. We need the radiation to clear a little more, Prispin replied. However, we were able to glean a lot of information using drive signatures and gravitational silhouettes. Most importantly, this Destican flotilla is on a direct course for the Sanctuary Moon. They're coming to us. How long do we have? Ino asked. 6 weeks, plus or minus 72 hours, Prispin said. Shit, said Sota. They must be hauling ass. Oracle Aster waved his hand lazily, and the hologram shifted. The image zoomed into the enemy fleet until only the hostile ships were visible. Describe the enemy fleet, Aster said. What are we facing? The enemy command ship is a Varnui-class battleship, Prispin explained, using his pen to point out details in the hologram for the others. It's still too early to say whether this is the Sonomoni itself, but the escort fleet around it might give us more clues. Axiom stood up from his place at the far end of the table. The enemy escort fleet consists of 28 starships, Axiom said, 9 cruisers, 12 destroyers, plus 8 smaller vessels that I cannot identify at this time, possibly frigates or corvettes. Ino swore. Still, that's 10 super capital ships, she said. Enough firepower to glass this little moon from a distance. Destican battleships will sometimes fly with a heavy escort like that if they're carrying a VIP, Sota said. It's likely that this is Zilfalin's brother coming to save him. Did human intelligence come up with anything about this guy? Ino said, looking at Prispin. We think the brother in question is Prince Golbein Zilfalin, Prispin said, one of Araj's older brothers. Our intelligence teams think that Golbein was some kind of enforcer of the Nivella's orders, rather than a frontline fighter. Battlefield scans we took during the liberation of Savasia shows that his vessel, the Sonomoni, is a typical silo ship, configured for long-range combat using missiles and other guided munitions. I remember seeing his ship after the battle for our homeworld, Rylan said. He attacked the Adimash once, fired a barrage of missiles at us from extreme range, to overwhelm our defenses through sheer volume of fire. I've no doubt that if we were alone and unsupported, my ship would have been destroyed. When Golbein arrives, he may try to force our surrender using the threat of a massive attack from orbit, Oracle Aster said. What are our defensive options? Very few, Rylan replied. We have only 2 corvettes, a rudimentary ground-to-space missile defense system, and whatever weapons we can salvage from the Marathon. We would have the advantage in a planetary battle, Sota suggested. Sheer numbers, thanks to Nagini and her people. But what good are those numbers if the enemy can vaporize us from hundreds of thousands of kilometers away? Nagini responded. Those ships will have antimatter missiles. Just one warhead will reduce the colony to ashes. Could we evacuate the colony? Aster asked. Flee before the enemy arrives. Not enough ships, Rylan replied. The Savanti population, the freed slaves from Tennesilsi, thousands of enemy prisoners, and the human survivors? We'd have to make multiple trips with both the civilian and military vessels. Plus, once the enemy gets closer, they'd notice and plan accordingly. Our sensors are up again, and that means the same is true for the Desticans. Ino sat back in her chair and furrowed her brow, thinking hard. She knew that running away was unworkable, that defending was infeasible, and that attacking would be suicidal. How on earth could this ramshackle colony and its exhausted defenders survive the coming battle? Ino thought so hard her brain hurt. I have wargamed 50,000 possible combat scenarios, Axiom told the group. Perhaps I should detail the more unique encounters for your consideration. Wargames are such a strange thing, Ino muttered to herself. Only winning move is not to play. To her right, Sota suddenly stopped in the middle of his conversation with a Savanti officer and turned to Ino. What was that? Oh, nothing, Ino said. Axiom said something that reminded me of this 200-year-old movie I saw in basic training once. The only winning move is not to play, Sota repeated slowly. He looked at Ino and moved his lips, forming the sentence again. Silence spread out from the pair as other people at the table noticed that Ino had been struck by an idea. No way, Ino said to Sota. You've come up with crazier strategies and tactics before, Sota said. The Galax incident should have spoken for itself, but you've pulled a few crazy stunts since then. What you're suggesting is fucking insane, Ino told him. I know it's insane, but I'm not rejecting it, Sota concluded. Rylan looked from Ino to Sota and back again. Then he turned his face to the Oracle. Sir, I have come to accept that Captain Esperanta here has a brilliant tactical and strategic mind, even if her fellow humans consider her idea to be unorthodox. We should hear what she has to say. The Oracle tented his fingers and narrowed his eyes at Ino. At his prompting, Ino began to explain the details of her idea. And over the course of an intense 7-hour meeting, a plan of action began to take shape. The next day, the plan was put into motion. Ino, Sota, and Elodie rallied the surviving members of the Marathon's crew. We're leaving, Ino announced. We're going with the Savanti to their colony in the Northern Hemisphere. Engineering team, come with me, Sota called out. We need to cut Axiom's AI core out of the ship and take it with us. Shut down all communications, Elodie ordered. No more transmissions off-world. Stop trying to call Earth. We can't do that now. The 2 remaining Savanti corvettes, plus a small flotilla of civilian starships, started to ferry people from the Marathon crash site to the Savanti colony on the other side of the sanctuary moon. The small city had been constructed out of the reassembled remains of a colony ship, and covered an area of just 2 square kilometers. The Oracle returned to the colony first, while Ino and her team made preparations to dismantle the most important parts of Marathon and package them for the long trip. Axiom, the portside cloaking sail is inaccessible, Ino said. Will you get some androids to help us dig it out of the ground? Right away, the android replied, leaving Ino and her command team on the shattered remains of the bridge. Then Ino looked around her team. She spotted acting Ensign Yamada, who was helping a crewman pull apart a computer console. Hey, Yamada, Ino called out. When the hell do you turn 18? Yamada screwed up her face and counted on her fingers. Today's the 13th, right? She said. My birthday was on the 2nd. Does that matter for us right now? Sota said, raising an eyebrow at Ino. Yes, said Ino. It means I don't have to ask her to leave. Ino tapped Yamada on the shoulder. I promote you to full ensign and induct you into the Coalition Armed Forces, blah, blah, blah. You're on my command team now. Get over here and be part of this conversation. Yamada beamed as she stood up and crossed the bridge to stand alongside Sota, Elodie, Prisbin, Mancini, Indungane, Zapata, Hamilton, and Chaplain Oliver. Zhao Hui is so badly injured from fighting on the Kailasha that she's not coming back to her old job, Ino said. Yamada, until I say otherwise, you're the boatswain. Hamilton, you're chief of the watch now. Miracle Hamilton made a startled yelping sound, then awkwardly shook hands with Yamada, saying, I guess you've got my old job now. Congratulations. I need this ship torn apart, Ino said. I'm about to violate 70 or 80 rules and regulations, but it has to be done. Yamada, Beninato, get down to engineering and pull both the antimatter reactor and the dark matter cloaking generator. Package them for transport to the Savanti colony. Mancini flinched. Do I need to remind you what'll happen when Coalition Stratcom hears about this? He said. I'm hoping they'll turn a blind eye when we hand over Araj as a POW, Ino replied. Get to work, everyone. Make this happen. It took an additional 36 hours to remove the AI core, antimatter reactor, and dark matter cloak from Marathon. During the downtime, Ino got another chance to rest and recover from her wounds. She did not choose to do this, but was bullied into it by an exasperated Zapata, who had at least found a way to soften the blow. Why not take the evening to hang out with your friend and make sure she doesn't get into any trouble? Zapata said, gesturing with his thumb at a scene playing out behind him. Ino looked over his shoulder to see Elodie screaming with delight as a group of wounded were offloaded from a Savanti shuttlecraft. It was the starfighter pilots who had failed to return to Marathon during the battle, primarily because Marathon had crashed, leaving the pilots to fend for themselves. Alan Sharp, Dylan Kelly, and Pavlo Ivashchenko looked worse for wear, as though they had gone through hell. Elodie had not seen her boyfriend since before the space battle, and she tried to pepper him with kisses at once, only to be rebuffed by one of the nurses. These pilots are trying to recover from G-force injuries, blunt trauma, and the after-effects of constant exposure to a low-oxygen environment. The last thing they need is you jumping on them. Pavlo Ivashchenko waved weakly at Elodie, then blew a kiss at her before allowing the nurse to secure a breathing mask over his face. Ino and Rylan decided to spend the evening with Elodie and Pavlo. The foursome sat by one of the many campfires around Marathon's crash site, taking in a rare moment of calm. While Elodie fussed over Pavlo, Ino looked up at the sky. The Nexus storm was clearing quickly now. For the first time, Ino could see the stars. Then she looked down and saw Rylan sitting next to her. Reluctantly at first, then more quickly as she relaxed, Ino allowed her thoughts to drift away from the crisis at hand. "Thanks for coming out here with me," Ino said, "and for supporting my idea at the meeting. You've been, like, the most supportive boyfriend a woman could ask for." Rylan shifted closer to her. "Of course, though the credit should not go to me alone. Axiom provided me with plenty of advice for how to date humans, though the events of the last couple weeks has prevented me from acting on it." Ino laughed, then cried. The act of laughing had caused the bullet wound in her stomach to sting. "Sorry, I didn't mean to laugh at you," Ino chortled. "But why did you get dating advice from Axiom? Why not a human?" "He told me you've been intimate with both a synthetic life form and an organic life form before, that I needed to consider how my cybernetic body might differ from any previous organic or synthetic you've known." "Axiom let that slip, huh?" Ino said in a playful, fake angry voice. "Remind me to unplug him." She seethed and held a hand over the barely healed wound in her gut. Ino used her right hand to hold herself, as her left arm was still in a sling. "And don't worry, I think I need a few weeks before I romp around with my heroic captain. I'm still in rough shape." From Ino's right, she heard another laugh. Elodie and Pavlo were laying on their backs next to the fire, stargazing. Both of them turned their heads to look at Ino. "Zapata says we'll need to wait a month," Elodie said. "We both have severe lung damage." "We should not exert ourselves," Pavlo added. His words, "I would much rather exert." He tickled Elodie, who yelped and swatted playfully at him. Rylan looked thoughtful. "You know, there is an option," Rylan said slowly. "A way to recover from your injuries faster. But it would require you to make a life-altering decision." Ino, Elodie, and Pavlo looked at him, curious. Ino figured it out first. "Are you talking about cyberization?" she said. Rylan nodded. "Isn't that really important to your people?" Ino asked. "Would it be appropriate for us to get augmented?" She was thinking about the cultural and religious significance cybernetics held to Rylan's people. In the low light of the campfire, Ino could see the ritualistic symbols etched into the biomechanical implants around his eyes and hands. Rylan smiled at the trio. "The fusion interlink is not exclusive to my species," Rylan replied. "Remember, we seek the perfect fusion of flesh and machine. We would be cruel and heartless if we withheld perfection from those who would seek it." Elodie sat up. "So, hold on. Your people can put cybernetic implants in people who are sick or injured?" "It is government policy to always offer upgrades and implants to those who are hospitalized," Rylan said. "When an organ is damaged, it is preferable to replace it, don't you think?" "Our people do transplants," Ino said, looking at Elodie and Pavlo. "Synthetic organs are so new, they haven't really taken off on Earth yet." "But your people have had more time to perfect the technology," Pavlo said, sounding convinced. Ino put her hand on Rylan's shoulder. So, let's say that I want to cyberize, Ino said. Do I just get my injuries repaired, or can I get some new upgrades as well? If you're truly interested in cyberization, I can speak to my colleagues, Rylan said. Those of us who are open to the idea of letting humans into the Fusion Interlink have formed a large majority in this election. I am confident I can make this happen for you. Ino looked down at her bandaged arm and leg, then at the half-synthetic body of her lover. Ino's heart started to race.
As you're on your way back home, something catch your eyes untold. Fear of darkness lingers here. You tremble as you get the fear. Now you're on the cornerstone.